So, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me this fine Monday morning or Tuesday, depending on where you are in this lovely green planet. Today is week 4 of the PTS. There was some balance changing, mainly with gear sets. So we're going to be investigating, seeing if anything was over nerfed, over buffed, etc., etc., and then giving feedback as well, because there is always room for feedback. So let's open up the PTS right here. Let's sure that's number 1 priority. Okay, so week 4 of PTS 3.1.3. Handful of bug fixes, some balance changes, housing, blah, blah, blah. So they added, you can preview the houses now. Not going to be doing that. That's not what these streams are about. We're here about math, information, and all of the juicy combat details. We'll leave the RP stuff to the RPers. So 3 new houses, hooray, hooray. Some fixes for some housing items, some additional changes to the dungeons. So there's extra mechanics on hard mode for Bloodroot Forge, which is good because I found that fight to be way easier than the Falkreath Hold hard mode. Falkreath Hold hard mode was pretty brutal. It was a lot of fun though, and it's definitely doable. And Earthgore was much easier. It's kind of a fight of attrition. It's a lot of movement, but it was relatively simple once you got it down. So yeah, glad to see that. We'll have to see how that is. Maybe do a run of that sometime this week or next week. Some changes to Falkreath Hold, and then some fixes up to the achievements there. So hooray, hooray. Some changes to base game, Maw of Lorcage, finally, hopefully fixing lunar platforms. Before there was this bug where you would just stop getting the Lunar Bastion buff and you just die to Rakat. So glad to see that is quote-unquote fixed. Not sure if it is, but hooray for bug fixing. And then you'll also know when you have Lunar Bastion's visual effect when it's active. So great. All right. Fixes with blah, blah, blah. Combat. So, the Lady, Shield Expert. This 30-point CP unlock now increases spell and physical resistance by 1500 when you are using a shield or a Frost Staff. So now, if you're a Frost Staff tank and you're trying to make that dream come true, you'll gain the benefit of this. So you're not losing a shit ton of resistances, which is pretty damn helpful. Still not as good as Sword and Board, so I don't really suggest it, but hey, whatever. If do what you want to do. This used to increase the value of your shield by 75%. So old values of gold C160 shields without this passive, if it was non-reinforced, it was 1720. And then if you had the passive, it went to 3010. And then if you had a reinforced shield without the passive, it was 1995. And if you had this passive, it became 3491. So let's open up a handy dandy calculator and add that 1500 to the 1720 base. So if you have a non-reinforced shield, instead of having 3010 resistance out of your shield, you now have 3220. So a pretty sizable buff, 210 mitigation, under 1%, so not going to be anything dramatic, but hey, free mitigation, very, very helpful. And then if you have a reinforced shield, we take that 1995, add 1500, and instead of 3,491 resist, you now have 3,495. So you gain 4 whole mitigation points, which is literally nothing. If we divide that by the 660 for 1%, it's less than 1. It's really, really small, 0.006. So 0.6%, less than 1%. You won't even notice anything. So it's not a nerf. Very helpful if you don't have reinforced shields. It kind of opens up itemization because you're not missing anything crazy.
Great work making all this understandable for his common people.
Thank you, Jules, for the $5. Really appreciate it. Glad you appreciate my work. Do what I love. So thank you very much. First donation, thanks. Really appreciate it. All right, back to the patch notes. So, fixed an issue where Minor Slayer buff was being removed if you equipped multiple item sets that granted the buff. So, I'm not sure what this is. I've never put on multiple Minor Slayer buffs at the same time because it doesn't stack. It's 5%. It's the minor/major buff system, so you only get use out of one. So, doesn't make any sense. I'm not sure why this is being fixed. Like, if you put it on, it just prevented you from getting it at all. This is not fixing the percent amp issue that a lot of us have been talking about on the forums currently, like executes, or if your ability goes off percent amps like jabs or something. It's currently being much weaker than intended, or at least than used to be, without even saying it's intended. And this is not going to fix it. So I'm not sure, like, when that's going to get fixed. Maybe next week, because they said 1 more week of balance changes. So this is not the percent amp fix, unfortunately. But hey, more bug fixing, whatever. All right. Fixed an issue where some werewolf abilities were not animating properly when weaving light or heavy attacks with them. So I'm not sure what this means, if this is a buff or a nerf. So before, if you're a werewolf user, some of your abilities are really, really clunky, but they still happen the same way that you press the buttons. It's just visually hard to sync up with them. So it was hard to realize what you were doing unless you have like damage text floating and you're like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm getting my attack off. So I'll look at it. I don't think anything's really changing. I think it's just visual fidelity instead of actual balance changes. So nothing really crazy with Werewolf. It's more of the people who aren't really good at weaving yet might have a few more visual indicators. Champion point system, again, we renamed that shield expert passive into bulwark instead, because now it applies if you don't have a shield, so hooray for RP consistency. Alright, here's the big stuff, which is itemization balances. Item sets. So, Amber Plasm. Decrease the magicka and stamina recovery set granted from this item set by 250 from 300. So you lose 50 magicka and stamina recovery, which is going to be a little bit more because that will work with percent amp. So if you have things like ratio passives, class passives, CP, all that stuff, it's going to be a roughly 1 to 200 regen nerf in both magicka and stamina. So if you're using that set in PvP, you're getting a slight nerf. Amber Plasm is really popular because of how efficient it is at the moment. So it's kind of nice to see that retracted so you don't feel like, hey, I have to wear Amber Plasm. And also, farming that dungeon really sucks because Runes of Mazatoon is bleh. Alright, Beekeeper's Gear. Decrease the health recovery granted by this set to 400 from 500. So again, with percent amps, this is going to be a bigger decrease than 100. Since there isn't as many health recovery amplifications in this game, it's not going to be as large of a nerf as it is with Amber Plasm or something, because unless you are purely stacking health recovery, which means you're sacrificing damage, you're sacrificing like incoming healing, all sorts of that stuff, and regen, then health recovery isn't going to be all that great. So if you're stacking a lot of it, it'll be a big nerf, but that's kind of not ideal anyways. So pretty much what this is doing is trying to retract some of the power of those really hard to mitigate health regen tanks out in Cyrodiil right now, because things like Troll King, Beekeeper, percent amps from regens, Orgrim Scales, like all of this really silly stuff that you laugh at when you look at it and be like, who would ever use this? There are really hard to kill people in Cyrodiil, and especially in Battlegrounds with objective-based gameplay, those builds have very little counterplay. So we're seeing some of that power being shifted away into a healthier state where it's like, all right, now it's not like this person is just staying alive through Major Defile, through Burst Ultimates, through all of this stuff. So kind of nice to see. At the same time, it's a very niche playstyle, so it kind of sucks. I would have probably nerfed it a little bit less, but whatever. Draugr Hulk increased the max stamina from this set to 2540 from 2500. So we got 40 stamina. That will be affected by percent amps. Really, really small buff. Not going to really change anything with the set. Draugr Hulk is decent at the moment. However, it was a pretty niche set, mainly for like Stamina Templars or things with percent stamina return, so like shards and stuff. Draugr Hulk was really, really great, especially in PvP. I even made a BG build for it back before Morrowind, because I didn't think that all of the balance changes were happening like that. And now it's really not all that good because there's no percent resource return anymore except for like Undaunted synergies, which is really small. So unfortunately, Draugr Hulk is kind of out of favor, and this buff isn't going to change anything with that. So unfortunate, would probably need to be a little bit more, but yeah. Green Pact, decrease the max health granted from this set to 2,500 from 4,000, but increased the health recovery to 250 from 200. So a little bit of give and take. We're gaining 50 health regen. That'll be affected by percent amps, but we're losing 1,500 health, which will be affected by percent amps. So Green Pact, not going to have that crazy HP stacking. So all of you Blazing Shield Plar builds out there, I've been seeing a lot of you in BGs. You are a pain in the ass to kill, and you're going to be losing a little bit of power from that. You will gain a little bit of health recovery, but if you were running Beekeepers in tandem with Green Pact, you are losing. You're at a deficit. So you're going to be easier to kill, but still probably be a pain in the ass. So don't worry too much. It's not going to kill any builds, but it's definitely bringing these sets in line, because it was like, all right, if I'm a tank and I don't want to give my group utility, I'm going to use Green Pact, Plague Doctor, Beekeeper, all of these really, really powerful defensive sets. So we're seeing that retract, and it's opening up gear diversity, but at the same time, getting gear sets sucks, or getting gear sets nerfed sucks. Iron Blood decreased the snare applied from this set from 75% to 50%, so you move 25% faster when it procs. Still not going to be all that great. Pirate Skeleton just blows Iron Blood out of the water in terms of efficiency. 2-piece set versus 5-piece set. Pirate Skeleton's negative effects can be purged. Iron Blood cannot, although with this change, maybe it can be, so we'll reinvestigate. Always double check with PTS changes, or just every time a patch happens. If you see something mentioned, double check before you assume. Leviathan increased the weapon crit from this set granted from 1643 to 2470. So if we quick pop in the calculator quick, we take 2470 minus 1643. So we gain 827 crit rating. We divide that by 219.1. And we're gaining 3.77% crit chance. So almost one set bonus worth. Still, I don't think it's going to make this set BIS. It'll definitely be in a much healthier spot. It'll be a good, like, poor man's 5-piece set, like if you want to run jewelry and you're not going to run a monster set. So if you're just looking for an easier to craft set with Mother's Sorrow or something, because they both got the same change. Leviathan, unfortunately, is a BOP set. So again, if you're not looking for trial setups and you want to run 2 5-pieces instead of a monster set, you'll have that option, and your DPS deficit will be smaller than it was before. So they're buffed, but I don't think they're going to change up in terms of performance too much. Again, we'll investigate over that the next few days to double check, because never assume, even though the math says, hey, it might not be as good as we think, things can change, or things can be a little bit different in reality. So we will investigate those. Maw of the Infernal, the monster set from this set.
Juice.
Marcel, thank you very much for the 10 euros. Really appreciate it. My favorite knowledgeable Nightblade brother, XOXO. XO to you too, my friend. Thank you so much for the support. Alright, Maw of the Infernal. The monster set now deals flame damage instead of a mixture of flame and physical damage. So this is not going to be really a stamina build set anymore. It wasn't really to begin with. However, we do light attack a little bit quicker than Magicka build, so it wasn't that awful as people thought, especially after the speed increase. It was doing decently. Again, it's not going to shatter any meta. It was more of a goofy thing to run, so if you were running like a Warden build with like a Pet Master with like a bear, and you want to do Morkeldin and just silly stuff like that, it was something fun. Again, it wasn't wowing any crowds in terms of DPS, but now it's going to be more of a Magicka build set, especially for Sorks. I'm actually quite interested in seeing how this operates, because it will be buffed by Daedric Prey, I believe. So with these changes, now that it does all that flame damage, that means more CP scaling. It means using spell reduction better, because it won't inherit your spell penetration, won't inherit your crit, because it's still a proc set, can't crit. So we'll look at it. I don't know if the PTS template has access to it, so it might have to wait until Horns of the Reach goes live. But very interesting to see. Might be a little bit of a hidden OP for Magicka Sorks upcoming. Mother's Sorrow, again, went up to 2470 from 1643. Got roughly that 3.77% crit bonus, so kind of nice. Probably not going to change anything too drastically. Rhineth decreased the delay from this set Instead of a 3-second wait until it explodes, it now takes 2 seconds. So it's a little bit more quicker in terms of dealing damage. So it's going to help in terms of mobility. So if you're fighting an opponent who's really, really quick in PvP, or if you're doing something in PvE and mobs are just moving around too much, it'll go off 1 second faster, so that helps up its importance. Still, it's going to have the same cooldown, which is 3 seconds, so it's not going to increase its DPS aside from landing on targets a little bit more consistent. Still, even with a complete stationary target, Valkynscoria was beating Narayanith in almost every way, shape, and form. So I don't think this is enough. Again, we will investigate. That's just my conjecture. We need to investigate instead of assuming.
Look at all that juice.
Thank you for the support. You're amazing, Gilliam. Woot woot. Thank you. You are amazing. From Chrisana, I'm sorry if I pronounce names wrong. I'm very bad with that stuff. Thank you so much for the support. All right. Plague Doctor. I talked about this before. It did get nerfed as well. Decreased the max health granted by this item set to 4,000 instead of 6,000. So we lost 2,000 health, ignoring percent amp. So that's a pretty large nerf. I really don't agree with the severity of this nerf. Like in PvE, it was a nice selfish set. Like a lot of people used it because it's like, shit, I'm doing really hard content. I want to make sure I stay alive so my healers can focus on keeping my DPS alive, or there's just so much damage I'm not comfortable with like using my abilities properly yet. Like I'm still learning the fight. So it's a very helpful set in terms of I'm starting a new fight, I need to learn. It gives a little bit more room for error. So I really hate that this set was nerfed because it was never BIS to begin with. It was a selfish set. You sacrificed a lot of group utility. Like, yeah, you get that little bit of extra health given to your Igneous Shield to help your group, but Igneous Shield has a 6-person target cap. It goes to the closest people, so that usually means it's going to go to the off tank and only melee. So it's not as powerful as people like assume it was. It was never BIS. It was very, very helpful, aside from that one small like week where tanks could just stack HP and infinitely sustain with entropy. But once that got changed, Plague Doctor became a selfish option. But instead, you could run things like Alkosh, help kill the boss faster, or Torug's Pact, or Powerful Assault, or Dragon, or these really great support utility sets that enable group DPS, which kind of remove the need for tankiness. If you kill something quick enough that you don't have to worry about those really punishing mechanics, well, then you don't need that extra health. So it sucks to see Plague Doctor get nerfed this much. I think 1,000 health would have been fine. I really think this was a little bit overkill, especially in tandem with the Green Pact and Beekeeper. Like it really sucks to see so many tank sets get nerfed in one patch when tanks don't have as many tanky options. It's like, if you're a tank in ESO, most of the time you're running 50% support, 50% selfishness. Or if you're in a really endgame group, it's all support, and you have no tanky sets. So it sucks to see him get nerfed, but we'll live. It's not going to ruin any builds. You're still going to be able to tank, but it's going to be a little bit more punishing in terms of learning new fights. So unfortunate, but I think we'll make do. Hopefully ZeniMax kind of gives it a little bit more back, just so it's not as this like humongous of a change. All right, Celine's. Increase the delay from this item set proc from 1 second to 1.3 seconds. So, personally, I found Celine's to be a very easy to dodge effect, but I have really quick reflexes. I hear the roar. It goes off about 2 seconds before it lands, so the auditory cue is very, very forgiving. If you hear a bear, means dodge or move away from whoever you're fighting. However, I realize some people listen to loud music, some people don't play with sound, so losing that cue meant you had to rely on visuals alone, and he dropped pretty quick. So if you didn't have like split-second decision-making, you're often getting eaten alive from this set. So helping give a little bit more delay to the set means you have more time. Oh, hey, a fucking giant green bear is coming. I should probably either sidestep or just dodge backwards or block or whatever. So a little bit more counterplay with the set. Again, I don't think it was 100% necessary, but it's not insane of enough of a nerf that I'll stop running it. Celine's is still very strong, but the power from Celine's comes with crowd control. You CC your opponent and then Celine's procs with it. So it's not just like, oh, hey, Celine's is procking. Because if an enemy is mobile and constantly moving, Celine's misses anyways. So that's one thing that I really suggest to people. If you're not being crowd controlled or you use immovability potions or something, and someone's running Celine's, don't stand still when you're fighting them. Just keep moving in circles, like run around like a little monkey. You're going to avoid so much free damage from that and be able to kill them much easier. And again, if you're using this set, use the set with crowd control, because that's how you get it to go down and control that burst. So, adding more counterplay, making the user have to think a little bit more. I like that sort of gameplay element where you have to enact useful and interesting tools in order to enable that damage instead of just getting free procs. Spinner's Garments and Spriggan's Thorns, for that matter, both got their penetration value reduced from 4,000 to 3,450. So, I logged out on the PTS on accident. So let's just open up a calculator because I don't want to use my brain today too much because I am lazy. So we lost 550 penetration. So in PvP, that's not even 1%. We take that 550, divide it by 660, it's 0.83%, or yeah, it's 0.83%, so not even 1% in terms of mitigation. So we're not losing an insane amount of damage. There's still going to be very, very powerful sets. But in PvE, we did lose a little bit because, again, in PvE, instead of 660, it's divided by 500. So we're losing 1.1% damage penetration. So I don't even need to use that one. So 1.1% damage nerf in PvE, less than a 1% damage nerf in PvP. So Spriggans and Spinners, both still going to be very powerful in their respected uses. Spinners is more of a PvP set because light armor already has concentration in PvE, and pen cap is 18,200 or 18,500, so we don't really need a lot of sources of penetration. Meanwhile, Stamina doesn't have access to that, so gaining item sets to help them does give that option. Now, what I really like about this change is the DPS difference from Spriggans and Night Mothers is almost non-existent, because Night Mothers got that really big crit bonus, so it's probably going to beat Spriggans now because it has so much weapon crit associated with it, and now that difference, that 4,000 pen is now 3,450 instead of Night Mother's 2,580. So it's a little bit more in line. That crafted set's going to have group utility, it's going to have crit, but if you want consistency, then Spriggans will still beat Night Mother's Gaze. So it's more of a preference thing. I personally always liked Night Mother's because it had group utility. I love crit. It's a very powerful stat, and Spriggans gave that like really flat bonus, and it's still going to be quite strong. So definitely more suited to like Maelstrom Arena, maybe some overland stuff. But if you're into endgame DPS, Night Mothers is going to beat Spriggans now with the changes. And we'll be investigating that once Horns of the Reach goes live. I'll remake those comparison set videos with the updated guides or the updated information. All right. Tumor Scale. This item set proc now has a 1-second delay instead of instantly dealing unavoidable damage. Gina, I love you because you realize that that damage was unavoidable. It just appeared. And so many of us were so angry about this set because there was no counterplay. We had to be omniscient to be, oh hey, that 50% proc chance is going to happen now when he's using puncture. I need to block. Now we know. Oh shit, he's puncturing. I should probably hold block. There's going to be the delay. Hopefully there's an audio telegraph. I think we have access to it, so I'll test it out, see if there's like a telegraph that appears or if there's an audio indicator, because unavoidable damage is stupid. It should never exist, and adding counterplay to sets really, really helps. Still, I think Tremor Scale's potency isn't so much the burst, but the snare associated with it, so I would really like to see that snare come down maybe 20% or so on top of this delay, and I think Tremor Scale would be in a much healthier spot in terms of PvP. All right, and finally, Willow's Path. Willow's Path has been broken for almost 2 years, I think. So pretty much since, I think CP came out, Willow's Path has been broken. So a little under 2 years. The percent increase of this recovery granted from this item set will now modify all flat increases to recovery such as drinks. So percent amps do not stack in this game with one another. So if I have a 10% modifier and a 10% modifier, they add to 20%, not 21%. They're not multiplicative of one another where they add up with the original value. So they apply to flat values. So if you consume a drink, if you have a set bonus, if you have a proc set, if you have something that states gives X amount of recovery instead of percent amount of recovery, Willow's Path will amplify that, including drinks. So before it wasn't doing that, especially with drinks, so Willow's Path was a really, really weak set. Like a lot of people say, why don't you run Willow's Path? Because it wasn't applying to things that it was supposed to. Now it will. So Willow's Path is really going up in efficiency. Definitely going to be investigating this with a lot of recovery set builds because 15% regen to everything is pretty damn powerful. It's a little bit stronger than the Nightblade passive. I think Nightblade is 10%, or no, it is. It's the same as Refreshing Shadows, I believe. Unless Willow's Path was 10%, and I'm misconfusing it. But still, now that it applies to these things, it'll be in a much healthier spot. So hooray, hooray. Alright, so most of these other things are just like little fixes, crafting economy. Fix an issue where gradual health drain poisons would report an unusual duration between the 2 and 3 difference. So there was like a visual indicator that was broken. Now it's fixed. Fix an issue permitting some resource restoring poisons to tick more often than intended. I don't know what this means, but I know for a while resource restore poisons were very popular in PvE because sustain sucked. Apparently there was a bug where you got more regen out of them than intended. When I used them, which was very infrequently and I didn't really investigate them heavily, I didn't notice anything out of the blue like wow, this is really helpful. So I wonder if it was like a specific poison in general, but I didn't really notice anything with that. So it's interesting that they mention it. Like I didn't know that it existed, but more balance, good. But at the same time, if you are relying on this for sustain, Morrowind patch sucks at sustain. So fixing some of this stuff, I'd like to see some sustain come back from Morrowind. Like really, really please us. Give me more resources so I can actually like do a full rotation without heavy attacking. Some crafting fixes with writs, groups and dungeon. So in Banished Cells 1 and 2, the final boss would get stuck on his platform and he would just sit there and look at you and not do anything. Now that's fixed, so he'll come off of his platform. That's good. No more bugged fights and random resettings. Fixed the quest issue in City of Ash 2, whatever. And then a bunch of like other little stuff. Yeah, housing, questing, and that sums up everything with that. So that's the pretty much everything from the patch notes. So let's plop this out of here. Let's get into like what we're actually going to be investigating. So I spent about an hour and a half getting all of my crafting up and stuff so that I could do the DPS templates. Before I posted on Twitter, I don't know if any of you or all of you saw it, but I posted almost a 40k single target parse with the Nightblade. Let me see if I can find it really quick on the PTS. Because Rich asked me, hey, what are you pulling on Magic and Nightblade? And I was like, well, I don't have any screens with me that I'm like are worth showing. So let me go get one. And then I realized PTS templates didn't have gear that I wanted. So I just threw together some stupid stuff. This is not a real build, but I think this is it right here. Yeah. Open that up. Add that. Just give me a sec. There we go. So, might be a little bit hard to see. Let's zoom in. It's probably really, really pixelated, but 39k. Again, this is on the small dummy. This was pure cheese. This is not real DPS. But we threw together some stuff, and this was with charged. We used a charged staff on our front bar. I don't know if you can see it, probably not. But you see charged weapon, we used a shock enchant to apply minor vulnerability, and then we also used force pulse instead of swallow soul, so that we had the extra burning, concussed, and minor maim procs. Because with charged, you increase the chance to proc all of those things by 220%, I believe. Let me double check. Yeah, 220%. So you almost triple the proc chance in terms of what it is. So a shock enchant normally has a 20% chance to proc concussed. Now, if you have the weapon skill, elemental force, it's doubled, so that becomes 40%. And then if you're using charge, that 220% applies to the base of 20%, so that becomes, 64%? And then you add on the other 20% from doubling it, so it becomes 84% chance to apply minor vulnerability or concussed from the shock enchant every 4 seconds. Minor vulnerability lasts 4 seconds, so that means if you're rolling the dice properly or like lucky enough, you can keep up minor vulnerability 100% of the time. Now, due to bar swapping and the fact that we're not on this bar permanently and that we are running a Maelstrom staff on our back bar and it would not be ideal to run double charged, it's never going to be 100% from one person. I think I was at like 80%, like 77% or 80% with Force Pulse and Flame Blossom. It procs like crazy, or the charge enchant with shock. So in terms of solo play, this trait, for Magicka DPS at least, is beating everything. It beat Precise as a front bar, it beat Sharpen as a front bar, just because we gained access to that minor vulnerability, that 8% free DPS when it was up. And at a 77% uptime, that's almost the listed value of 8%, a little bit less, but still extremely powerful. The things to realize with that, though, is like if I did a really, really long parse, it wouldn't be up as much because there'd be more bar swapping, there'd be more mistakes, there would be more chance to get in line with its listed proc value. And the other thing is that when we do run charged on our front bar, as a Nightblade in particular, we have to change our bars up a lot. So you can run Swallow Soul instead of Force Pulse, but that means that you're going to need to run a Destro Staff ability on your bar somewhere in order to get that Ancient Knowledge passive. So that's another reason why I have to use Force Pulse on my bar in order for that charge trait to gain effect. Now, if you're a Sork or something, you're using Force Pulse already, great. You don't have to worry about that. That means you're getting all of the value listed out of it. Everything's great. If you're a Dragonite, you're probably using Wall of Elements on your front bar. However, if you're using a charged front bar and you have a VMA staff on your back bar, that means you need to run Wall of Elements on your back bar. So it really kind of forces you to play around the trait, so it's not going to be an end-all be-all bis, because a lot of players have a hard time adjusting to new rotations. I had to go through the rotation about 3 times before I was like, oh hey, this is how my buffs line up. Because since I'm not running things that operate at the same duration, like normally I have a VMA staff on my front bar because I run Cripple and Wall of Elements together because they're both 8 seconds. That way, oh hey, I apply them both and then I bar swap because my back bar has Twisting Path, which is 11 seconds. So it gives more room for like fluidity. It's much simpler. But with this, since I have an 8-second duration here, an 8-second duration here, an 11-second duration, I'm bar swapping like crazy. So it's a very difficult rotation. But that charged trait with the shock enchant just blows everything out of the water in solo application for DPS. The one thing to talk about that, though, is that when we get into group play, it's not as powerful because only one person needs to do this, and you have other people. So if you have Sorks running Force Pulse, they're going to have a 20% chance to, every time they Force Pulse, to apply Concussed. So you don't need everyone in the world running charge. You only need 1, maybe 2 people if you're worried about uptimes, like you need to split because there's a lot of mobility in the fight, or you're doing like Halls of Fabrication where the groups need to split up, like on the 2nd boss or the 4th boss or something like that. Then you might want to have 2 people run it. And before, the old meta was that you had a healer run charge with the shock enchant because minor vulnerability lasted 6 seconds, so it was much easier to keep up. So healers can't run it as easily now because it lasts 4 seconds. That minor vulnerability from Concussed is 4 instead of 6. So as a healer, your job, you had to light attack every 4 to 6 seconds to keep this up and use Wall of Lightning to proc off balance. Now with sustain and things being really difficult and you having to focus on healing more, it's much harder to do that. So now it's more ideal for a DPS to run this trait setup, which with charged and the shock enchant. So you lose some self DPS in terms like of a buffed group. Like if someone else next to you has like a precise enchant with a Berserker enchant or a precise trait, they're going to do more DPS than you because you are enabling them. You're enabling that 8% minor vulnerability to apply to everyone in the group. So it's a self-loss, but a group gain. So yeah, you lose maybe 800 DPS as opposed to that shiny Berserker enchant with the precise trait. Like, yeah, that's a really strong setup, but you enable so much extra DPS that your allies make up for your deficit and turn it into a gain. That's all what competitive rating is about, is enabling DPS, not self DPS. It's not everyone running the same basic gear setups. It's people buffing one another so that, yeah, maybe they pull 1 to 2k less than the next guy, but that next guy is now going to pull 3 to 4k extra DPS to make up for it, and you're just going to do so much extra DPS. So really, really crazy with Flame Blossom. And then I ran 5-piece Master Architect. That was just a cheese with Soul Harvest. Ideally, you'd run something like Julie. But now this week, we're going to look, okay, well, Julie is really, really strong. We already know that. It's beating a lot of things. And it was, Mother Sorrow was definitely losing to it. But now, Mother Sorrow has so much crit. And Shadow is already ideal. So that means no matter what, extra crit is going to be really, really powerful. So gaining all of this crit might help lessen the gap between Julie, and it might even beat it in some instances. So it's going to be interesting to see. We're going to have to test. Definitely going to be using the Lambent Centurion for this because crit is such an unstable thing. Like, if you noticed in that parse, let me just pull it up again really quick. I had like 48% crit chance, but since it was such a short fight, some of my abilities had an 8% crit or an 80% crit chance. So let me just find that again really quick. Window capture. Yeah, if we see right here, my average crit chance was 47%. So 47% crit chance. That's not a lot. That's very, very little. But if we look at the parse, Light Attack 49, Assassin's Will 80, Blockade of Fire 44, Twisting 51, Impale 64. So only like 2 things were under my listed tooltip of crit chance because it was a burst fight. It's a very short phase. So if I use the 3 million or even the 6 million dummy, my results are going to be highly corrupted due to this chance nature of crit. So that's why I use the really big target dummy, because you're attacking so much that you allow these really big test pools to get really, really accurate results. So that's how you investigate, hey, is this set better than this? Instead of just sitting on the 6 million or 3 million dummy and saying, oh, hey, I beat it by 1k this time, because there's a lot of chance that can change those variables. So I'm probably not going to do that on stream because it lasts about 10 to 12 minutes. If I make a mistake, I have to reset. And this rotation is very convoluted. And the other thing is that, well, since this is operating through crit chance, we're not going to have to really change our traits too much. So there's not too much to change with that, which is super, super helpful. But we will investigate Julie versus Mother Sorrow, and then we'll do Master Architect again. But it's really, really cheesy. But pretty much what I ran with that 39k parse was Master Architect, 4-piece Flame Blossom on my front bar, and then the Maelstrom Staff on the back bar. So 4-piece Flame Blossom is really, really strong because you gain 1487 penetration. So that means you gain a lot of freedom in terms of, hey, I don't have to put as many points into spell erosion. Or if you're in a group, you don't have to put anything in there at all because you have debuffs like Alkosh or maybe Infused Torrigs, Major Minor Breach, all of these really powerful buffs. So that spell penetration opens up CP optimization a little bit more. And you're gaining Minor Slayer from Master Architect as a 5-piece. But if we weren't going to run that, then we would probably just run like 5 Julie and then 3-piece Moondancer, Master Architect, and then run a 1-piece bonus on our front bar. And we'll investigate, hey, how big is that DPS deficit between Minor Slayer and Flame Blossom? Because there is this issue at the moment with percent amps where things like that 5% Minor Slayer are becoming much less than they actually are because of these additive issues with percent modifiers at the time. So like things like Impale instead of gaining 5% flat damage with it from Minor Slayer, I gain closer to 2 or 3% because I have so many percent amps that come together, and instead of adding together just like 5% plus 10% to 20%, it's all adding or multiplying of one another, but without retaining their base. So it's a very, very small number instead of their listed value. So hopefully that gets fixed. Otherwise, we might remove Minor Slayer with this penetration buff, because gaining that much free CP is pretty strong. But at the same time, it also means having to farm Flame Blossom, which is from Horns of the Reach, and you're going to have to get precise. Maybe you need Sharpened if you're a pure solo player, or maybe you need Charged if you're a pure solo player, stuff like that. So farming gear, and it's going to be a pretty tough dungeon. So we'll see how that is. Is it even worth it, sort of thing. But that'll be over probably on Wednesday, and then I'll do a video about it on Thursday or Friday in terms of stream and discussing that. And then we're also going to be looking at Leviathan for stamina. We're going to see, because before, Leviathan was losing to Defiler, a proc set. It lost to a proc set, which can't crit. I was using Shadow, I was using Precise, I had all of these crit bonuses, and it was wasted on Defiler because Defiler can't crit. No proc sets can. So it's like, Defiler was that much better than Leviathan, which was really scary, because it's like, this gear doesn't match up with my build, which is all about high crit hit damage, and I brought in something that was the complete opposite of that playstyle, and it still beat Leviathan, because Leviathan was just really, really inefficient in terms of set bonuses. But now Mother Sorrow and Leviathan are a little bit more. But again, remember, we only gained 3.77% crit chance, which is less than one crit bonus. 1% less. What is it, 1,066? Let's go into the calculator quick. Divided by 219.1. So yeah, one crit bonus is 4.86% crit chance. So we're gaining less than one crit bonus from this buff, which isn't really all that amazing. It's still something. It helps bring it up in line. But still, the fact that it lost to a proc set, which didn't mingle with my build at all, I don't think this 3.77% bonus is going to be enough to bring it up in line. It'll still be a really strong beginner setup, because like Mother Sorrow is BOE. Magicka has less crit enabled to them, so it might be a little bit stronger. Pretty much what we're comparing. Julie and Mother Sorrow have the same exact 2 through 4 piece bonus, so it's 300 spell damage versus 2470 crit. So what's 2470 crit? Let's just find that out really quick. 2019.1. So 11.27% crit versus 300 spell damage. That 300 spell damage will be affected by class buff. So if you're a Sorc running Sorc abilities, you get 2% per. You get Major Minor Sorcery, which is 25% bonus. So I'm not sure if that 11% crit will be able to beat it, but maybe if you're running in a group with super high aggressive Warhorn up times, it might be able to, but again, we'll investigate that over the coming week. Oh yeah, and then the other thing is that someone asked me to test Scathing Mage on Mage Warden. I did, and it was awful. I think the uptime was like 53% over the 6 million dummy. So on the 25.8 million, it would be even less. So in groups where you're getting sustained, Scathing Mage might be a little bit stronger on Warden, but in terms of like the Warden in general, a lot of their abilities are actually broken. Like Fetcher Infection is direct damage, and Scorch, their 3-second delay attack, is being considered Thaumaturge in terms of how it scales. So I wouldn't rely on Scathing Mage. That's like relying on Scathing Mage as a Nightblade when Twisting Path was proccing it, because like it's not supposed to happen. So even if it was good, it's like it's going to get fixed eventually. Why bother going to farm it just to have it be nerfed, sort of thing. That being said, I did go back and look at Scathing Mage. The only way Scathing Mage is just consistently beating Julianos is if you're using Force Pulse. So you need to be in a group with like one of your healers wearing Worm. You need someone applying Ellie Drain or yourself. You need to be using siphoning attacks off cooldown. you need to have orbs or shards in group. You need a lot of sustain. Or if you run Witch Mother's Brew, you can also sustain it. And the uptime was roughly 63-64% uptime in single target. And then in AoE with Sap Essence, it was like 80% uptime. So in AoE, Scathing Mage is still the go-to gear set. But in terms of single target, it's very hard to say because Scathing Mage is very volatile because of the proc chance. I would really, really like to see it go up to 30%, or at least have executes have triple chance to proc, because the same thing happens with Templars. Templars keep it up solo like 68% of the time because it procs off Burning Light, which happens from jabs and spears. It procs off the first hit of spear. It procs off the first hit and dot tick of reflective. So they proc it like crazy, but as soon as they get into execute with Radiant Oppression, it just plummets, and it's not procking as much as it used to be. So I would really like to see Scathing Mage have like a bonus modifier in terms of procking with executes. I think that would make it a lot better.